G'day everybody, my name is Elliot Waters and you're listening to the Dysregulated podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. Today's episode is all about cognitive distancing, how to separate ourselves from negative thoughts. But before we get into that, if you're enjoying the show, feel free to like, subscribe, give us a rate and share it around with your mates. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, you can certainly do so at elliot.t.waters. Okay, so when we suffer from a mental illness, it's inherent in our condition that our thoughts have negative biases. We can very easily fall into the trap of accepting what our thoughts are without really testing their validity. If we accept our negative thoughts on face value, it can be very difficult to remove ourselves from their grip and look at the bigger picture of things. So those with depression often find themselves thinking that they just are not good enough, or that if they've made a mistake, whether significant or not, that automatically means that they are a failure and always will be. Now, someone suffering an anxiety disorder may think that they are always so anxious and forever will be, or that people are judging them negatively, even though we know, and I think we do know this, that most people are actually really focusing on themselves. So it's very easy to get swept away by our thoughts and emotions, which can have a large bearing on our actions and behaviours. We can feel trapped by the thought, unable to move beyond it. So this is where I think the crux of my whole freeze mode relating to anxiety comes in. My inability to move beyond the particular thoughts that I'm having and the emotions that come with them, which then equals the behaviour of, staying in bed and not doing the things we need to do. And if we can't look beyond the present thought, we can very easily lose track of the bigger picture, like I said before, and that can cause things like impulsive behaviours or otherwise poor decision making. So to overcome this problem, we really need to distance ourselves from our thoughts. We need to evaluate them on merit and remember that thoughts are exactly that. They're just thoughts. And it's up to us how we respond to such cognitions, not the thought itself dictating our emotional and behavioural responses. It is not the thoughts that should drive behaviour unless we have determined them to be accurate and valid. So a therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy very much focuses on cognitive distancing, or in their terms, cognitive defusion. That is, removing the fusion between our thoughts and ourselves and aiming to look at our thoughts as they pass by rather than necessarily getting caught up in them. So we observe our thoughts as they come and go rather than holding on to them as if they are representative of the absolute. In acceptance and commitment therapy, we don't want to ignore our thoughts or feelings, but rather acknowledge them and look at them objectively. A thought is an incursion on our mind and is only as significant as we allow it to be. So this is very much, I suppose, a metacognitive process. So how do we do this? Well, the first step is that we must actually identify what our negative thoughts are. So to do so, we must be mindful and present in the moment and look at our thoughts from a position of objectivity. See the thought as it enters our consciousness instead of becoming one with it automatically. And then we evaluate whether it is positive or negative, helpful or not. The aim is never to ignore or repress these thoughts. I'm telling you, repression does not work, as the research has shown quite clearly that they would just return with a vengeance. Then, after we've done that, we've identified that this particular thought we're dealing with is a negative one that isn't helpful. Then we need to label the thought. And this is especially true if these thoughts are very specific and they regularly feature. So for example, one that I have a lot is there is my I should quit the podcast thought again. So by naming a thought, we essentially create, I suppose, a type of persona or at least a set of parameters around the thought. All of a sudden, the thought isn't a continuation of the self. We are not the thought. The thought is its own living being, you could say. And because it is its own living thing, we can now judge it and appraise it as if it was like an object even, rather than, like I said, an extension of ourselves. We do not embody the thought and vice versa. So what we are doing by labeling and getting some clarity around the thought and what its purpose is and what it's actually trying to say, we are unfusing ourselves from the thought. So we are putting it in a little box separate away, and then we are judging it accordingly. What we can also do is thank the mind for the thought. I know that sounds a bit silly, a bit weird, but stick with me. So cognitions, generally speaking, are a tool in which we use to make sure we're doing the right things, we're on the right path, whatever that path is. Of course, it's very individual. It's different for everybody. So it is our thoughts and emotions that then drive behaviours. And it is the role of the thoughts to inform said emotions and behaviours. It all starts with our thoughts. So thank the mind for bringing to consciousness a thought that it felt would be helpful. Even if the thought isn't helpful, we want to encourage profound thought, as it is the root of all that we do. So often our thoughts have merit, even if they do provoke feelings of fear, guilt, shame, etc. But remember, it is up to us, the self, to evaluate and then proceed. If the thought is far too negative given a situation, that's also okay. We can distance ourselves and evaluate it objectively, like I said. And by evaluating, we replace the negative thought with a positive and more realistic idea about our perceptions. So here's a little tip. We can use sarcasm as well to really get distance from the thoughts and to show that we are the ones that are in control. So for example, yeah, I know. I shouldn't do the podcast. I know you keep telling me. Thank you very much, but come on. We know that this is a good thing that we are doing here, all right? Thank you. So this reinforces the fact that we don't have to take each and every thought so seriously. Another little idea that we can use is to say the thought out aloud. That way we can create more distance by putting it out in the open. We expel the thought like we would a breath. Some people will even give the thought a funny voice to really drive home the fact that it is indeed us, the individual or the self, that is in control here and not the thought itself. So in a way, you're almost mocking the thought, almost a little bit, because we want to encourage thought, but at the same time, if the thought is ridiculous, well, that's the judgment we've made and that's how we need to respond to it. So, and the last point is to rephrase the thought. So instead of, for example, I am anxious all the bloody time, add some factual basis to the thought. So instead we could try, I am anxious right now, and thank you to the mind for letting me know, although I'm pretty sure I already knew anyway, but thank you all the same. But this moment will pass as it always does. We know this. So thank you, thought. I appreciate it, but I'm going to watch you drift off into the distance now, and we're going to move on because we know that this moment will pass. So by doing this, this reinforces once again that it is us that has the power here, not the thought itself. We pivot away from taking it on face value, and instead we use it to our advantage by pivoting away from the negative and towards the positive. So in this episode, I've sort of used cognitive distancing and cognitive defusion interchangeably, but it must be said they are two very distinct constructs. So cognitive distancing is a term and an idea that is synonymous with cognitive behavioural therapy. So cognitive distancing is more about grappling with the thought itself, engaging with it, and then changing it by using things like checking the facts of the situation, really challenging the logic that underlies that thought. So it is a reasonably held belief in psychology that cognitive distancing is the first step, you could say, using CBT. And once that has been achieved, an individual can move on to cognitive defusion using the acceptance and commitment therapy framework. So cognitive defusion, on the other hand, asks us not to wrestle with the thought and to try and change it through will, strength of will, but to notice it instead and evaluate it for its validity. We don't try to change the thought, like I said. We instead regulate how we manage our reaction towards it. So cognitive behavioural therapy looks to teach people to better control the thoughts themselves and its underlying meaning, whereas acceptance and commitment therapy tries to help people notice instead and then respond accordingly. So we're not diving in and trying to change the thought, we're merely noticing it and then evaluating it on its merits. So ACT reinforces the idea that the self, us, is an objective observer who notices and has the ability to flexibly choose when to engage with thoughts and how to actually do so. Thoughts are almost an external phenomena from the self, doing its own thing. It's not necessarily a direct link to the self. Whereas CBT, on the other hand, sees our thoughts as more intrinsic and I suppose you could say fundamental to who we are and what we believe. So let's look at an example at how CBT and ACT would approach a negative thought from their own different viewpoints. So for example, the thought could be something very simple: bad things always happen to me. So CBT will ask the individual to evaluate the thought using facts. What is the logical basis for this statement? Is there a logical basis for this statement? Do only bad things actually happen to me? If not, what are some of the good things that happen? Let's challenge the validity of the thought head on. On the other hand, acceptance and commitment therapy would ask us to diffuse from the thought. Okay, I'm having that thought again that only bad things happen to me. It's the Elliot is being negative thought all over again. I'll tell you what, this one comes up a lot. So here it is. I can see the thought. It's come in. That's fine. That's all good. I know the mind is trying to direct me towards the right path. That's a good thing. But I know this thought is a bit silly. So silly, in fact, I'm going to say it out aloud. So what was the thought? Bad things always happen to me. See, it sounds very silly when I remove it from my mind. Okay, now we can let go and continue on with what we are doing. Knowing such thoughts aren't real and don't have the significance over me like they think they should. I know that that's ridiculous. So let's watch it disappear. It hasn't been able to latch on and cause any influences on my emotions or behaviours because I know it's silly. I just said it out loud. It's ridiculous. So we can now move on. Now, of course, as with any psychological interventions, using tools and techniques from various therapies generally is the best way forward. So cognitive distancing in the CBT sense works very well if we aren't aware that our thoughts are misconstrued. So if I truly believe only bad things happen to me, then it's important we really tackle that thought specifically and work to check to see if it's a true representation or not. Because at this point, I'm not sure. It feels real to me. So CBT works very well here. If we know the thought isn't accurate, but it keeps reoccurring and we find ourselves accepting it without too much pushback, then cognitive defusion using the acceptance and commitment therapy framework is the way to go. So notice that the thought has resurfaced again, but choose to let it go and not pay it any more attention than it bloody deserves. So you could put it this way as well. CBT tries to change or correct thoughts, whereas ACT aims to alter the meta function of our thoughts so we are not tangled within our thoughts and emotions. So that's very important. If you do truly believe that a certain cognition or thought is true, CBT is the way to go because we need to build that argument and enlighten ourselves that this idea that we've got, this preconceived idea, isn't actually right. But once we've done that, then the key is to diffuse from the thought. So it may keep popping up, but we know now that it's not true because we've done the work in CBT. So now we can use the ACT principles and get the distance from these thoughts that we know aren't true, even though they keep popping up. So a paper I recently read touches on this subject when looking at distancing or diffusion versus distraction. So Larson and Christian-Feld in their paper, Cognitive Distancing, Cognitive Restructuring and Cardiovascular Recovery from Stress, published in the Journal of Biological Psychology, found, in my opinion, some very interesting results. So distraction, a very common psychological process where one focuses on something other than the thought itself. So that could be like reading a book, going on social media. That's one that I use all the time. Going out and exercising. That's something I need to do more of, etc. Distraction. Okay. So in their sample, half the people the whole sample was shown negative stressful stimuli. Half of the sample used distraction as their coping mechanism and the other half used distancing or diffusion as their coping mechanism. So it was found that distraction was actually quicker at getting respondents who are exposed to stressful stimuli back to their baseline physiological outcomes, such as heart rate. But if they are exposed to the stimuli again a week later, their measures shot straight back up again. So those who used the psychological distancing techniques didn't see results as quickly in the short term. But a week later, when shown the stressful stimuli again, their physiological measures barely move. Hey, that's good news. So this is very much about short-term pain for long-term gain. And this paper evidences the fact that distancing or diffusion does a better job at ensuring long-term gain. So what we really want to achieve with this practice is creating an automatic response to our thoughts. That without thinking, we use distancing or diffusion and evaluate the thought on its merits. Although we will marginally prolong the sensation in the short term, that's what the paper was telling us, long term is where we see the greatest benefits. And this is true for so many psychological interventions. So I really want to stress the point, no pun intended, that we are looking at longer term quality of life outcomes here. The easy option is to distract from our thoughts, but to really improve one's life and rid ourselves of the strength of negative thoughts and everything that comes with it, such as leading to negative emotions and then poor behavioural outcomes, cognitive distancing and diffusion wins every time. It's a slow burn, but if you can use these tools and create these tools as part of an automatic response to negative thoughts, then quality of life improves big time. So I hope this episode goes some of the way to explaining how we can get some distance and diffuse ourselves from negative thought processes. So we need to identify the thought, if it's helpful or not, positive or negative. We can give it a label to really get that distance and unfuse it from ourselves, because thoughts are their own beast. They are not necessarily representative of us and the self. And we can also say the thought out loud just to really hammer home the fact that we are in control here, and the thought that we're thinking is a little bit silly and ridiculous, and we can let it go and move on indeed. So thank you for listening. I hope that helped. If you're enjoying the show, feel free to like, subscribe, give us a rate and share it around with your mates. And I will see you next time here on the Dysregulated podcast.